Mesdames, Messieurs, bonjour. Aujourd'hui, dans notre
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today on our show, Africa Europa, within the framework of Africa Week, we will be discussing the relationship between Europe and Africa with MEPs, with Carlos Zorinho and Madam Marie Arena, who will join us very soon. And then online, we have Noella Cousaris, Charlotte Sack, Innocent Baloume, as well as the journalists Muriel Deve, Patrick Ndungidi, and we have Jean Bull as well, who will join us shortly. Now, Udo Bullman, you really conceived of Africa Week, so could you just tell us what it's about?
Udo Bullman, bonjour.
Udo Bullman, can you hear us? Good morning.
Bonjour and good morning, everybody. It's nice seeing you, and we hope that we have a very exciting event this morning.
Vous pouvez nous parler des...
Can you tell us what are your objectives for Africa Week?
Week has a huge tradition in the Socialists and Democrats group because what we think, Socialists and Democrats, that African nations, African people and us, we have a huge chance to shape the future together. But that can only happen if we come together, if we talk to each other, identify challenges of tomorrow, jointly find solutions to that, and enjoy discussing together, celebrating together. Unfortunately, now we have the pandemic, but these digital events we already organized last year, and it functions very well. So the prospects are great, but we have to stick together. We have to come together, politicians, but not only stakeholders from the business community, from the universities, journalists, civil society activists, but especially young people. We have to come together and find common ground of how to solve the problems and get new ground for tomorrow. That is the purpose of the Africa Week. This time we are shortly before the African EU Summit. That is also a great chance to interplay and to dialogue with the leaders of the world.
Jean Bollet, vous avez peut-être une question.
Jean Bollet, would you have a question to ask? Yes, indeed. Now I have a question for you, sir. Now, you've just talked about the common challenges that are facing both Europe and Africa. What are those challenges? Do you think that the next EU-Africa summit, which will take place in a couple of weeks' time, do you think that this is really the occasion to provide responses or to really to remodel this partnership which doesn't work? Of course, we always talk about the relationship between Africa and Europe, but maybe we need to rethink the relationship. What do you think?
I think you are precisely right. It's not very difficult to identify the challenges of these days. There is, first of all, the COVID, the health crisis, the need to vaccinate the world, also the people in Africa. We have to support them in whatever means. There is the economic backlash according and as an impact of the health crisis. We see many economies in the global south, especially in Africa, suffering from the backlashes of the last 2 years. We have to develop strategies to fight climate change and enable our societies in the global north as well as in the global south to develop a sustainable way of living, a sustainable way of producing goods and services. That is a major task according to the Sustainable Development Goals of the 2030 United Nations Agenda. And in the middle, for me, the focus is the fight against inequalities, because only if the young people, I say it again, but not only the young people in African as well as in European nations get the chance to involve themselves, to develop their capacities, to contribute to the wealth of their nations, then we can do the job. And therefore, we ourselves, Socialists and Democrats in the European Parliament and beyond, we urge on the European leaders as well as on the leaders of the African nation to find common ground. And for the Europeans, that means we have to design our measures of collaboration, our offers, whether that is Global Europe, NDG, the new financial initiatives, the Team Europe approaches according to these goals. That is the new task, that is the challenge, and that is the issue on top of the debate.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Madame Arena, bonjour.
Madam Arena, good morning.
Donc, je pense que Jean a une question sur vous.
I think John has a question for you about good governance. I know Madam Arena very, very well. We've worked together a number of times, and we indeed went on mission together. And in fact, I carried out a report on one of the missions that you were working on now. Today, we see, in fact, that coups d'etat are coming back to Africa, and this is something that we only saw back in the day. We do see that there's a certain weakness in Europe's reaction. How can you explain that? That would be my first question. And the second would be this putsch, in some people's opinions, is in fact the result of a failure between the cooperation between Africa and Europe. In fact, we quite often see that people end up supporting the coup d'etat in Burkina Faso, in Mali, in Guinea as well. But of course, these putsches do cause difficulties between Africa and France, for example, and Africa and Europe more widely. So as I just said to Mr. Bullman, this summit which will take place is perhaps an opportunity to rethink, but at a deep level, that relationship between Africa and Europe, and in every way. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the question. I think it's quite a wide-ranging question. Here, of course, in the European Parliament, we do have a hearing with Monsieur Le Drian, but representing the European Union. So he is, of course, the French foreign minister, but as France currently holds the presidency of the European Council, Monsieur Le Drian was discussing with us how he would raise these issues at the Africa-European Summit. And he spoke about the triptych that there is within these good relations, and that is to say investment, more investment in Africa, working on questions of safety and security, and according to him, talking about mobility and working on issues of mobility and migration. Now, this could be, of course, understood three issues which concern both Europe and Africa. Because, of course, the question of investment is extremely important in Africa, safety and security as well, especially in Northern Africa. And this issue of mobility, visas, for example, visas for Africans to come to the European Union, and of course visas in the other direction as well. And as soon as we dig into these subjects that Monsieur Le Drian has put forward, it doesn't seem to respond to what I think we need. What kind of investments? Do we just invest as we've done in the past? That is to say, investments that don't redistribute or don't respect African populations. Now, I asked him the question, and he considered that investments, for example, in Niger are investments that, in fact, do create wealth redistribution amongst the people. Now, this, of course, is good for Europe. We need uranium for our nuclear power plants. We've still got some of them, but of course we can't steal the uranium. So we have to have mining contracts which are transparent. That is to say that they don't feed corruption, that these are contracts that respect workers' rights, so they don't end up killing workers in mines, and contracts that respect the environment. There's a mine in Niger today that's that's been closed by its investors because they knew that had there been an inquiry about the environment and social damage caused by the mine, they'd be fined millions of euros. So in fact, they chose to close the mine. And I don't think that kind of investment is acceptable at all. So yes, we need to promote investment, but this needs to be sustainable investment, which respects these three objectives that I have already cited: transparency, the social and economic development of people, and the protection of the environment. Now, when we come to the second part of the triptych that I mentioned, security, well, it's all well and good to talk about it. If you look at the Sahel, security is the biggest issue for populations there at the moment. But does the current military presence respond to those needs? In Mali, for example, there were villages that were literally massacred, and the military intervention was not done properly. It wasn't carried out properly. It didn't. And why was this? Well, it only threatened Africans, so the Europeans didn't intervene properly. If there's a military intervention, this needs to, of course, take place in the interest of local populations. Everyone needs to be protected. Of course, there's a responsibility for Africans as well. And I wouldn't say that everything that happens today in Africa is because of what the West has done. There is responsibility in Africa as well. But there are, of course, areas where we can work together. Talking about migration, for example, Monsieur Le Drian said that they would put together a visa system which would allow qualified Africans to come to Europe. And I said to him, what about the others? What do we do for other people? There are people today that need protection. They need to move because they are in situations where they simply can no longer live. So what are we going to make them do? Are we just going to promote a brain drain from Africa and leave people in misery in Africa today? Now, I think that what is at stake here is again on the point of migration, and there are more and more countries in Europe saying that if there's a trade deal, for example, with Africa, these countries need to guarantee that they will keep their populations in their countries of origin. And my question there would be, well, why? What kind of condition why would we put such a condition on that? I'm a daughter of immigration. I'm a daughter of people who moved to Europe to work in coal mines, and millions of those people died in coal mines. And because of that crossroads between their interest, the interest of Europe, and the interest of the individuals. And what I would say is what we need is a policy which is interest of both continents. We don't want Africa to turn away from the European Union. That would be in nobody's interest. And it's in nobody's interest to have an Africa which turns its back on Europe. There are many others who are interested by Africa, and we don't have any exclusivity there. Now, of course, everyone's interested in Africa. You're a rich continent, rich in your population, rich in your resources. Rich is what is above and under the ground. So if we don't come to the table with an offer of building with Africa, well, Africa then, and fair play, find someone else. China, for example. Yeah, well, anyone. If we do a bad job, well, it doesn't mean necessarily that anyone else would do better. What would be your reaction to African populations that support coup d'etat? Well, I am, of course, a grand Democrat, so I would never be in favour of a putsch. But the difference is that there are European people who support some coup d'etat and then criticise other putschs. Was Chad not also a coup? And Mr. Deby, however, is supported by France. That was a putsch as well. So I think that we can't have one rule for some and one rule for others. I'm against all coup d'etat because I prefer democratic processes. However, when there are people that hold democracy, that they are democratically elected, but they do not respond to the needs of the people, that they are corrupt and the people know they're corrupt, well then sometimes, of course, there's no other option. But I'd never defend a coup d'etat. What happened in Burkina Faso, for example, was extremely dramatic, because we had Mr. Kaboré, who had his first term. He did what he could. He was really supported by the people in his first term. He then moved into his second term, and he had his office taken from him through a putsch, because it was in fact the soldiers, it was the military that was not doing their job, and I find that unacceptable, honestly. Because what was being attacked in Burkina Faso was the fact that the army could no longer protect the people. But in fact, it was the army that took the power away from the president. All they actually had to do was the job that they were supposed to do. So I find this issue with putsch extremely complicated, because it's not necessarily because you put someone in power that they then give it up. Mr. Zorrinho, you are co-president of the ACP-EU Joint Parliamentary Assembly. This Africa Week, it's your group that's organising it. What can we expect from this week when it comes to the challenges which are common to both Europe and Africa?
Well, good morning, and thank you very much for that question. Well, first of all, this Africa Week is aimed at being a week which is filled with values, to discuss without any prerequisites any matter that we wish. It's an African week which is very important, particularly during the pandemic, where the pandemic has tried to produce a result and a response of solidarity. But I think it's easier to maintain solidarity internally than externally. The populations of Africa are much more vulnerable to it, and therefore we need to increase our efforts in solidarity with African peoples and with different regions other than Europe. We need to change the perception of the crisis and the structure of cooperation. The structure of cooperation of donors and beneficiaries needs to change to become one of a partnership between Europe and other regions. So we need to mobilize people, but we need also to work on democracy. We need to have a majority to support us in this policy. And when Europe carries out an investment, for example, in Africa, then there is a fight for solidarity and involvement of peoples. So when it invests €2, it's not a gift, it's an investment. And it's with this perspective that we can use European funds, which Maria has worked on a great deal. The climate as well is something that Europe is going to need to concentrate on. We also need to manage the shadow reporters, to check and the scrutiny committees on carbon border adjustment mechanisms and so on. We need to see that these tools are being used to help African countries to increase their capacity to raise issues that Maria has also raised. So we need to ensure that investment means that everybody wins. We need financial cooperation which gives freedom to African countries to take decisions, whereas companies have worked purely on a commercial basis. And I think that's the great interest in the European Union and in Africa, great strength that can mark the geopolitical face of the world. Now, we've got the Joint Parliamentary Assembly. It's the second largest joint parliamentary assembly, 156 countries. So after the United Nations, it is the largest. And this helps us to deepen multilateralism and cooperation on a same level. It is not yet achieved, but it is on the way. We're going to have 4 parliamentary assemblies after Cotonou. We're going to have ACP and then 3 regions, which is very important for civil society. We have a group for women, a group for local populations, to allow them to democratically support cooperation. Well, we're just going to introduce you to a few people from civil society who are going to show their particular model for success in seeing the emergence of Africa. We're going to have Muriel and Patrick, which we could briefly introduce. Just a question each for our deputies. Yes? I'd like to write something. Things are not very well defined. What are the interests of each party? We need to be very clear in interests, and I have to say that we mustn't this, we mustn't do that. What is the interest in this partnership, and what would be the African interests? And I think things are not well defined. If things are not in our interest, then we should be very clear about it. Otherwise, it should be reciprocal, because I can't really see what we should base ourselves on. Right, Patrick, we're going to have our question, and then we can hear the MEPs. Yes? You can hear me? Yes? Well, we'll come back to you later on, but I'd like to ask how the European Union as an institution manages to reconcile interests. Each state has its interests and its interests in Africa, and how can you reconcile it with the European Union as an institution? Well, several things. I think I'd start with the last question first. Well, we've set up something that's called Team Europe. So this is both what are the priorities of the continent, of the European project of 27 countries as regards Africa, and what are the particular bilateral relationships that certain states have with certain African countries, political, cultural, financial, economic. Portugal has certain links with African countries, Belgium and France as well. So what we've succeeded in doing is to melt together what the countries have in their bilateral relationships with 1 or 2 African countries and try and bring that into the European project to strengthen it. So if you're in a particular country, you're going to see the European delegation, which is going to be in the country, which aims to promote the European project that we want to develop with Africa, and they're going to work together with embassies, national embassies based in that country, and that country can then work on, for example, the environment, if the environment is particularly important, or investment. Let's take, for example, Angola, and we say that the environmental question is very important. Well, the money from global Europe, European funds are going to flow towards development projects in the environmental field. So each country which is going to be present, Portugal, Italy, France, are going to come and add on to European projects, saying that they have the possibility of putting bilateral aid into this more general project, which is more developed. So we're going to see greater strength, greater interest, rather than what we see today, where everybody acts on their own in an uncoordinated way. So I think that we are going to see the African continent coordinate the approach with Europe, with the national approach in each country. Now, as for the first question of what's the win-win that we can find between the European Union and Africa, well, I always take the example of Niger. 90% of the French electricity supply depends on Niger and uranium. So you have to be present in Niger, and you have to have the access to minerals. But at the same time, what can be the win for the populations of Niger? Well, it should be to help them develop. But contracts haven't been signed in a very transparent way, so local populations can't really understand what this provides the state of Niger to have this kind of relationship. Then the second question is that they haven't taken into account the need to support local populations, and particularly for access to resources. So, for example, they need water, they need land. So the win-win would be to say, well, we need investments. Yes, Africa is short of investments, so we need to draw investors to Africa. That is the win that Africans can have, to have access to resources. So we can be a channel which promotes African investments. But as a counterpart, you're going to have to ensure that African countries are able to guarantee that they will carry out due diligence. I've raised the question to African officials to say that between the European investor who's going to be watching values, as Carlos has said, but who's going to ask for transparency, so is going to fight against corruption, and a Chinese investor who couldn't give a damn completely about the social and environmental situation in Africa, and who's going to provide a channel for corruption of African elites. Well, which out of the two are you going to choose? I've raised the question. If you're a representative of your people, in other words, the welfare of your people, you should choose the investment which doesn't increase your wealth, but it does increase the wealth of the people. So I think you're going to have to choose European investments because it's going to respect the local populations, which is not the case today. I'm saying straight away that I'm not saying that European investments always respect the populations, but we are going to advocate this in the European Union in working with Africa, and that's what we need to change. Well, just before we continue, Noella Corsaris, you're the founder of Malaika. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Yes, good morning, how are you? Yes. Well, in English as in French, as you wish. As you wish.
Driven ecosystem 15 years ago that can be duplicated in any context around the world. It includes a school for girls, a free school for girls where we have 400 girls, a community center where we teach more than 5,000 people a year, youth and adult. And end of this month, we're launching technical classes, mechanic and electricity with Caterpillar Foundation. We grow our own food. We have our farming where we teach about organic farming and it go back to the canteen of the school. We build and refurbish more than 23 wells, and we emphasize a lot our education with STEMs, with coding to our students. It took 15 years to build all of that. It's a lot of challenges. We're working in a village where there is no water, where there's no electricity. So even before building the school, we needed to build a well. Before we needed to install all the green energy to our
Excusez-moi, excusez-moi.
Excuse me, just a moment. Could we just show the members of the European Parliament whether you can see Noella? Yes, yes, you can see the video. Yes, so members of the European Parliament are listening to you. There's no sound in the video? Okay.
Where there's no infrastructure of roads. We built a school over the 12 years to host 340 students that will be the leaders of today and tomorrow. They're arriving at 5 years old at a school. We give them uniform, underwear. We teach them to eat with a fork and a knife, and they have holistic curriculum. We want to give them the aspiration to become whatever they want. Malaika is an ecosystem. We have the school, we have the community centers, we teach the parents, the youth, we have the wells, and we have the agriculture. We are empowering, we are leaders, we can work together and empower the next generation and the generation to come to impact our continent and the world. To find out more about Malaika, please visit our website, malaika.org.
Voilà, Noëlla, vous pouvez poursuivre, merci.
Oh, Noella, you can continue. Well, I think you put the old video on, but anyway. Yes, it allowed us to have an impact anyway. Well, I think it's very important, and I think it's very important to say that we represent an African generation, young generation, working together for health. I'm not getting any time.
And I want really to create the next leaders of the continent, and where they will bring their skills and they will create a human capability to rule the country and the continent.
Merci. On va passer.
Thank you very much. Now, we will come back to the MEPs very soon. We're going to introduce Inos Balume first of all, and we're going to introduce Inos, and then you'll be able to exchange your impressions and ideas and questions, of course.
Donc, Innocent Balume.
So, Innocent Balume, known as under his stage name Inos. He's an international star. He's from Congo. He's sold he's had hundreds of millions of views on YouTube. He's got numerous likes, of course, on his social media, and he's really an immense talent. He's also an activist, and he really engages for the least advantaged. He works with other stars as well, with Ben Affleck as well, for example, working in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where Inos is from. We can see here the village that Inos has built. And that was built after the last volcanic eruption in the east of the country. So, Inos, what have you done specifically? And first of all, good morning. Well, hello. Hi, Mona, and hi to the MEPs as well. It's great to see my sister on the stage here as well. I'm a big fan of Noella. Thank you very much for inviting me today and for allowing me to speak. Would you prefer that I speak in English or French? You can speak French if you're more comfortable with French. So, yes, so the images that you've seen there, that was of course related to the tragedy which happened very recently in my hometown. Now, Ngoma is a town very near to a very large volcano. And Goma is really very, very nearby. So there was a volcanic eruption. Now, I'm now based in Kinshasa, so I wasn't actually there. But I remember the last time that happened. It was in 2002, and I was a little boy at the time. So all of my bad memories from that moment came back. And I said to myself, now, I knew how difficult it had been difficult for us, for my family, and for all families. We all lost everything at the same time. And I said to myself, this disaster has really impacted families, and they need help. They need to feel safe. They need a roof over their heads. So we started the project with the IF Foundation. And we really just wanted to improve the way they were living. Of course, there was one of the problems in such disaster situations is moving quickly. Of course, there are different stakeholders that need to be involved and different decisions that need to be made by the government. So we decided to launch a collection for funds, which worked really well when it comes to the timing, when it comes, for example, to the things that we managed to organise. We managed to organise gala nights. And that's allowed us to help all of these people. And these people, of course, have helped me as well. They're big followers of mine, and they follow me on social media too. One of the advantages that we have as stars is that we can use social media, we can raise awareness, and we can get help for people who need it. So that's what we tried to do, and it worked really well. And so over 2 months we carried out the project, and today I'm very proud to have taken part and proud to take part in this exchange today, because I think it's very important. Of course, the problems happened in Goma, but it wasn't just people from that locality that took part. It wasn't just those people that helped. We have friends, of course, in Belgium, for example, Mr. Lobman, and many other people that took part anonymously and didn't want to put their name publicly on the project. But we did receive help through the platform, and we met lots of people who really had goodwill and really wanted to help us. Thank you very, very much, Inos. Mr. Zorinho, perhaps you've got a comment. What are your impressions then? I'll open the floor. Now, I'm going to give you a very, very quick response. This project, this specific project, of course, is very interesting because there are shared values. There has to be a political program, but there also needs to be pragmatism. And the essential question is people on the ground. What they want are, of course, positive improvements in their lives. And that's why we need to work together. And I think that's the basis for everything. Now, just to very quickly answer questions, Louis Lurine, of course, is fundamental. We're now 2 weeks away from the African European Summit. We need to really make an effort now. We need to ensure that we do have a programme of action, a strategy, which furnishes political responses that can deal with poverty and that can foster sustainable development when it comes to the digital transition, when it comes to the energy transition, when we talk about a bilateral vision of mobility. I'm sure this will set up a very lively debate, but I think we need a bilateral vision of mobility. And then the question is, how can the 27 member states, of course, engage in these relationships. There are, of course, relationships, individual relationships between countries and African countries, but there's this question of multiculturality, and I think it's those multicultural settings that can really bring our countries together. The links between people are much stronger than the links between governments, of course, because governments change. But I'd just like to let you know that Inos, Charlotte, and the other guests are also welcome and have been invited. Noella can't come because she'll be in New York. Inos will be present at the summit. So Inos can also meet you in person and you'll be able to continue your discussion. And of course continue to discuss any future projects as well as the projects that he's already been involved in. Now, we were supposed to have Charlotte online, but unfortunately technical problems have come to light, so we can't get Charlotte online, but she will also be present in person for other events during Africa Week and will be at the summit. Muriel Petri, perhaps you have other questions or comments? Anything to add from what we've heard from the various different statements? She could, for example, you might also react to the videos that we've seen. Listen, I always find these kind of initiatives fantastic. As Carlos said, this is solidarity in action. For example, what we saw there in Goma, people you've been, I believe. Yes, that's true. What really upsets me, and this is something that I think we really need to keep saying tirelessly, is that if Congo or other countries used their resources correctly, they wouldn't need foundations to build schools for them. So, of course, giving the responsibility of healthcare, education, humanitarian actions such as those carried out in Goma, giving that responsibility to the goodwill of individuals as we've seen, I don't think that's fair. And it keeps this idea rolling that Africa needs help. Well, Africa is in fact the richest continent on the planet. The richest. The African population is the poorest in the world. Carlos was saying earlier, our European citizens need to be convinced that a euro spent in Africa is €2 that will come back to the rest of the world. But I think we also need to convince Europeans that all of the wealth that we've built and that we build in Europe is in fact dependent upon Africa. So we do have responsibility. African governments have responsibility, and it's very upsetting for me to see that education is only being carried out because of a foundation. I'm a socialist and I believe that education should be run by the state. It should be the state which deals with education for everyone, and I think that it's the Congolese state in this case, but of course every state needs to guarantee that their education systems are of quality and for all Congolese people and for all Africans. Now, thank you very, very much. Now, we have to be quite quick here. And we're going to wrap up shortly with Carlos Serino because he needs to leave, in fact, of course, to preside the Joint Parliamentary Assembly. But we will join you again on the 8th and 9th during Africa Week. Now, we're very quickly going to continue here, and we're going to give the floor to the founder of the event. So, Patrick and Gidi, very, very quickly, please.
Je ne me prononcerai pas pour le moment sur tout ce que j'ai entendu.
No, I won't take the floor for the moment on what I've heard for the moment. I mean, I've been to a few countries. I won't say that they're all fantastic. I won't say their governments are always the best, of course. But in front of me, I see people here who can who can discuss everything that we've said, who are clearly very aware. We see entrepreneurs here who are doing very good things. We see very positive relations between foreigners. And for me, it would be problematic, for example, to say that all Chinese companies are banned. I couldn't say that. And of course, the only way to change the behaviour of businesses is to pass laws and to make sure they respect those laws. There are, of course, big Chinese mining companies in Congo, for example, who apply the law, and there are small companies that do and small companies that don't. But I think this kind of impression that everything is, doom and gloom and everything's bad, I don't think that's one that I subscribe to. There are, of course, people who are capable of properly defending their interests. And we don't need to say, oh, well, if you do this or that would be better. I think we can show our desires, our wishes. Madame Merino, what I'm now going to do is give the floor to Udo Bullmann. I wouldn't make a generalization. I'm simply talking about what's happening on the ground today. If it was working, we wouldn't be asking the question. Questions of poverty, issues of these dramatic situations that we see for people in many countries today around Africa. Now, as I said before, Africa is one of the richest continents. And the population, in terms of population wealth rankings, are the poorest in the world. So, of course, you can't simply say, well, everything we're doing is fine, it's all working well. I have the capacity to say, I wouldn't simply want to throw all that responsibility on the others. I think that we do have responsibility. I think we've all got a stake in this, a stake in a situation which is not satisfactory for people today. We're going to give the floor to Udo Bullmann. Of course, you'll be able to keep discussing on the 8th of February. It's just the very beginning today. So don't worry, you're going to meet other MEPs as well. So don't be too frustrated. This is just the very beginning for Africa Week. So, Mr. Bullmann, the coordinator of the initiative, I'll give you the floor.
Thanks so much.
Voilà. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much all that have contributed to this rich debate. Allow me to come back to the contributions of Noella and Inas, because they showcase what we are talking about, like in a nutshell. And the key word is empowerment. They show with their initiatives how to empower people. And that's of the essence for what we are talking about. You will find lots of guys talking about the new partnership between the African nations and Europe. You will find all the bankers, the politicians, they can count the numbers, and then they will tell you that we have some 80 billion for the next 5 years to invest in the global Europe initiative. If you take together all the European countries, then it's much more, Team Europe, much more than 100 billion. You know exactly that there is a gap of infrastructure investment of 100 billion each year in Africa. So they talk about leverage, they talk about mixed blended finances. I tell you what the best investment for leverage is. The best investment for leverage is people, is human development, is education, is healthcare, is empowering the young generation to have faith in their future. And this is the issue that we have to talk about. This is core for us in the Socialists and Democrats, and this is core of what we offer as a partnership for young, but not only for the young Africans in their countries and in our collaboration. And therefore, I very much would like to make you appetite to tune in for our conversation starting the 8th of February next week. In our Africa Week, there is plenty of occasions to participate. We will talk exactly about that, and I very much hope to see you all in. Thank you very much for this morning.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Udo Bullmann.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Udo Bullmann. Mrs. Arena, I have a question from Euronews here. As far as Mali is concerned, about Tabuka force. Could it be another force that could act as a model? Well, when I talked about the three pillars that we were working on, the security issue is one of those. That's very important. I think if Sahelian countries ask to be supported in the fight against criminality and jihadism in their country, then obviously we must help them. We'll have to do it together in the interest of the populations. Now, the fact that there is a European force present on the ground, following a request by the Sahel country concerned, well, that cannot be the end of it, because if we simply meet the security interest by sending troops, well, that we have seen in Afghanistan, we're heading straight for failure. So yes, to military cooperation which allows armies which are not sufficiently trained and equipped to take on guerrilla fighters who are better equipped, but it cannot be the only solution. Well, Udo Bullman, a question, political question about COVID-19. Is the Socialist and Democrat group working on the way in which one can put greater pressure on European leaders?
We have been very outspoken from the outset that we have to use all measures, I say again, all measures that are suitable to improve the situation in Africa. That means we have to steer up production in African countries themselves and give support to that we have to share vaccines, and that we also have to talk about property rights, because the most important thing is to save lives wherever in Africa and Europe, all around the globe. And only if everybody is safe, we all are safe. This is our message to European leaders, and this is also our message to the summit.
Merci. Alors, une dernière.
Thank you very much. And a final question from the European agency. Now, a few deaths in Africa from COVID. Talk about solidarity with Africa, delivery of vaccines. Do we not have more to learn from this continent? So that is the question raised by the Europe agency. Well, you know that European and African realities are very different. Africa has a much younger population. We see more people outside, whereas we tend to live inside on the European continent. But we see also a certain number of medical practices which have in Africa been confronted with epidemics a lot more deadly than this. Ebola, for example, or malaria are part of the day-to-day life of Africa. So, as compared to these transmissible illnesses, these are part of daily life, but we need to see that the health sectors are less efficient. So we have a more resilient population, as I've just explained, but when the case is grave or serious, then it's difficult for the state to answer. So I think that we need to think about vaccination of the more vulnerable populations, because the health sectors are not able to take into account these population groups as quickly. So in Europe, the needs are different, but there are vulnerable populations who need to have vaccinations, and that is why we're working on the possibility of easing access to vaccinations for the population. Well, thank you to all the speakers for having been on this program. The special issue, which is introducing the Africa Week. There's quite a lot to be debated. That is the aim of Africa Week. So it's not within an hour that we're going to try and find a solution or to challenge members of the European Parliament. On the 8th and 9th, we'll see them meeting again, and you can help to find paths towards solutions for Africa and Europe. Thank you very much, and see you again soon. And for those who are able to attend on the 8th and 9th, or virtually, Nuala will be in New York, I know, so I know that it's not the last time that you're going to be here at the European Parliament. Thank you very much. Thank you.